Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Faith Unaltered. I'm your host, David Russell, and I'm here with the man, the myth, and the legend,
Dr.
Tyler
Hugh
Fowler.
Ross. No.
What's up, buddy?
What is going on, David, man? I'm so excited to have Dr. Hugh Ross on, sir. It is an honor and a privilege to meet you, and I am really, really excited to talk about a matter of days. Genesis, Old Earth, Young Earth, all the things that we have been talking about on Faith Unaltered for the past month. We have the man, the myth, the legend with us. So, sir, it is an honor. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yes, Dr. Ross, again, for the guys on the left side of this um, broadcast, you have impacted our lives like you wouldn't believe. So, again, we are just honored that you're here with us. And we also got with us Travis. He's actually part of the Reasons to Believe apologetics community.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, really good to be here. Just really looking forward to this. Like everyone was saying, Dr. Ross, you've had a very tremendous impact on my faith, and really appreciate your work. And yeah, just looking forward to a great broadcast.
And
So,
go ahead, Tyler. Introduce
Yeah,
Dane
we
real
also
quick.
we also got my brother, my young Earth creationist brother, Dane Von Ace, back with us. I say, you know what? I was talking to David before we did this, and I say, you know what? You got 3-on-1, and so I've got to get my bro to come on with us. And so, Dane, man, how have you been since the last time we chatted with you, bro?
I'm doing great. I think I'm on the third Faith Unaltered show in the span of like a month or a month and a half. So your audience is probably getting pretty familiar with me. Hopefully, they're not tired of me. But
Who
it's
could be?
wonderful. It's wonderful to be here. And while I do hold to the young Earth perspective, I just want to say that I highly respect Dr. Hugh Ross, and I've watched I've watched many of his debates and things of that nature. And one thing I'll say that Dr. Ross, you always handle yourself with great poise, and just you have a high level of respect for your opponent, and you just are very charitable, and you are wonderful to watch and debate. So I appreciate you, and even though I disagree with your interpretation of Genesis, I think that you're a great example of how brothers in the faith can have charitable dialogue.
Agreed.
Well, thank you for those kind words.
Yes, and I even model my debate style the best I can after Dr. Ross. But he's been my big influence on that too. But yes, as you guys know, we do have Dr. Hugh Ross here, who's an astrophysicist, senior scholar, founder, and former president of Reasons to Believe. Holds a degree in physics from the University of British Columbia and a PhD in astronomy from the University of Toronto. His books include The Creator and the Cosmos, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, Improbable Planet, and Designed to the Core. Hugh has spoken on hundreds of university campuses as well at conferences and churches around the world. So, again, Dr. Ross, welcome. And Tyler, do you want to go ahead with the first series of questions? I will follow up with the science questions. So you get the first round. And guys, how we're doing this, just to give you guys a quick kind of intro to how this is going to play out. Me and Tyler are going to ask questions, and then there'll be a follow-up from either Travis or Dane or Tyler or myself. But we're only going to do it like we're do 1 minute follow-up because we do have a lot of questions to get to. So
We'll see how that
Tyler,
goes.
I will let you go since you have the better radio voice.
Fair enough. So, Dr. Ross, again, thank you for joining us. My first question is, could you just give us a brief overview of the Old Earth position and how that correlates to Genesis 1?
Well, there's several old Earth positions, over a dozen of them in the Christian community, but the one we hold at Reasons to Believe is usually referred to as a day-age interpretation, which is the idea that when you look at Genesis 1, it talks about 6 literal days of creation. But of the 4 distinct literal definitions, we believe the correct one is that the word day, reference to the creation days, is referring to a finite, long period of time. So it's 6 consecutive long periods of time. And
Okay.
where we differ, say, from evolutionary creationism or theistic evolution, we do interpret the biblical creation text literally and consistently. So we don't dismiss the miraculous interventions. We believe that God is the one that's responsible for the major changes we see in the history of life on planet Earth. We pay particular attention to the words for create and make, asa and bara, and say in both cases that's referring to God's miraculous interventions.
Okay. Now, just to clarify something real quick, because I know David and I have been talking about the long days, the long ages, in Genesis 1. And just to clarify something, that I'll hand it over to the panel. Whenever it comes to the days of creation, do you believe that God only assigns functions? So for example, on day 4, how it says that God saw the sun, the moon, the stars. Do you believe it took that long to assign function, or do you believe that there's other things going on and other things that are involved, and it's not only assigning function? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think you're
Okay.
referring to the writings of John Walton and other theologians. And I've
Mm-hmm.
written critiques on them. You can
Okay.
go to our reasons.org website and you'll see a 16-page critique I made of that view. And unlike John Walton, I don't think it's just function. I think the text is referring to both function and both creation, historical creation miracles. I think the functions were there in the very beginning, but
Mm-hmm.
as we move forward through the creation text, we see an unfolding of more and more functions. So
Right.
it's not just one function for the water cycle, for example. There are
Mm-hmm.
multiple functions. And as we go through the 6 days, those functions multiply. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. No,
Um,
absolutely.
Can I was going to follow up, Dr. Ross. I think that's a good point, and what's really important to highlight is because in my conversations, even at church with the young Earth creationists, there is a common misunderstanding that the day age view that we're somehow saying that the sun, moon, star, and everything was created on day 4, which was like a long time after the initial creation. And I think it's important to highlight the fact that we have the early planetary debris where the atmosphere is opaque. It becomes translucent. Then on day 4, it becomes transparent, where we need the visibility of the luminaries, and that interestingly, will pave the way for the Cambrian, which is day
Sure.
5 and so forth.
Well, what you see is that before you get to the 6 creation days, you got Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. And when it says the heavens and the earth in Genesis 1:1, that's referring to God creating the entire universe, including all matter, energy, space, and time. I mean, when I first picked up the Bible at age 17, I went through the Old Testament and discovered nowhere do you see the word universe. There is no word for universe in biblical Hebrew, but the phrase the heavens and the earth is an idiomatic phrase that means the entire physical reality, all matter, energy, space, and time. And then when you get to Genesis 1:2, it establishes the initial conditions and the frame of reference for the 6 days of creation. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I frequently run into secular scientists who will say Genesis 1 teaches scientific nonsense. Well, it does if you get the wrong frame of reference. It does if you get the wrong starting conditions. And what you see in Genesis 1:2, it explicitly states the Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of the waters of planet Earth. And then there are 4 starting conditions. It's dark on the surface of the waters cover the whole surface of the earth, and the earth is empty of life and unfit for life. But then the Spirit of God begins to work. And I think it's important, too, to point out that there are 3 major creation texts outside of Genesis that parallel the 6 days of creation. And that would be Job 37 to 39, Psalm 104, and Proverbs 8. And what you see in Job 38, verses 8 and 9, is that God speaks and he says he blanketed the seas of the earth
Right.
with clouds that kept the seas dark. So it's making the point that the reason why it's dark on the surface of the waters is not because of the lack of light in the universe. God
Mhm.
created that light when he created the universe in Genesis 1:1. It's dark because that cosmic light could not get through the atmosphere of the primordial earth. And so, in my interpretation, the miracle of creation day one is God transforming Earth's atmosphere from being opaque to being translucent, where light for the first time passes through the clouds to the surface of the waters, which allows life to begin to exist. So, in our model, we have the origin of life at the beginning of creation day one. But not until creation day four does the atmosphere become transparent. And there you see in verse 14 and 15, let there be the great lights so they may serve as signs to mark seasons, days, and years. And the frame of reference there is the surface of the earth. It's signs for the future animals that God will create. And they're the only species of life that needs to know the position of the sun, moon, and stars in the sky in order to regulate their biological clocks. And so, in our model, the sun exists before the 6 days. The moon exists before the 6 days. The stars exist before the 6 days.
Mhm.
They become visible to creatures on the surface of the earth in the sky on creation day four, but their light becomes visible on creation day one. And I wrote a blog in 2018. I put out a blog every week called Today's New Reason to Believe. But the one I wrote in June of 2018 describes an experiment that physicists did where they took the atmosphere of the Earth, the known atmosphere of the Earth throughout its different geological periods, and then they altered the oxygen content and discovered with an oxygen content less than 1%, the atmosphere is so hazy that you can't see the sun, moon, and stars in the sky. But when it
Mhm.
hits 8%, you can. And just before the first animals showed up on the Earth, the fossil record documents that the oxygen content jumped from less than 1% to 8%. And the moment it hit 8%, you immediately have animals. There's no evolutionary time delay. They show up instantly. And all the different phyla of animals show up simultaneously.
Hmm. So, just to follow up on that, then, I want to hit on something that you had mentioned about the perspective of the spirit on the earth. Would
Right.
that be, you said that that is on day four. My question is that also on day one? Do we get the earth's surface perspective from day one, two, three, four, five, and six?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's the frame of reference for interpreting all six of the creation days. And
Uh-huh.
with that frame of reference, if you compare what Genesis 1 states with the established scientific record, everything is correctly described. Everything is in the correct chronological order. But if you put the frame of reference above the clouds, 100% of it is wrong. As Galileo said, the biggest mistake you can make in Bible interpretation is to get the wrong frame of reference. And I
Right.
think Genesis 1 is a great example of that.
Okay. Dane, you got anything that you would like to?
So I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. So in Genesis 1:1, you're saying that that's God creating the universe, and that there's an undisclosed or amount of time before the 6 days of creation week.
Well, that's not from me. It comes from theologians like Jack Collins. Several theologians have written books on the early verses of Genesis where they point out that the verb order and the grammatical structure of Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 imply that there's a passage of time between God creating the universe and the statement of the initial conditions of planet Earth in 1:2, and another passage of time between 1:2 and 1:3. Now, it doesn't specify the duration, but it does say that there's a passage of time between 1:1 and 1:2 and 1:2 and 1:3.
So one thing I'm curious about is like Genesis 1:1 says the heavens and the earth, and if you're taking that as the whole universe, are we taking that also that planet Earth is in there? Because I know the secular cosmology would have Earth, 4.6 billion, whereas the whole universe is much older, 13 billion. But Genesis 1:1 seems to indicate that the heavens and the earth are coming in to existence at the same time. Or is it wrong to read planet Earth in there and Earth just means physical matter? How would you understand that?
Excellent point, Dane, because I've debated Michael Shermer, the executive director of the Skeptic Society, 4 times in university campuses. He brings that up every time, no matter what the topic of the debate is. He looks at that as the Achilles heel of the Christian faith. But what he's not aware of is biblical Hebrew is a very small vocabulary language. And I had to be fluent in French because I was trained in Canada, also another small vocabulary language. And how do you get fluent in French? You memorize thousands of idioms. Same thing about being fluent in biblical Hebrew. And that sometimes I call them mesmerisms, but they're really like idioms, where you got these phrases where they link together these Hebrew nouns in order to mean something completely different. And so this phrase, the heavens and the earth, with the definite articles, you'll see it used 13 times in the Old Testament, but in each case, the context tells us it's not referring to galaxies. It's not referring to planet Earth. It's referring to the entirety of physical reality, all matter, energy, space, and time. And when you recognize there's no Hebrew word for universe, then you would anticipate that there would be an idiomatic phrase that would have that definition. And that's why I think this debate over the age of the earth is predominantly an English language debate, because, English is the biggest vocabulary language that ever existed. And so we shouldn't be surprised that it's challenging to take that original biblical Hebrew and try to make sense of it in an English translation. I tell people, if you want to nitpick the scientific details, you have to read it in the original language.
Thank you. That's a helpful response. There is one other thing I wanted to follow up with you about, and that was the chronology question. So you were saying if we're above the clouds, the chronology is not right. But if we're looking at it from the perspective of being on the surface of the earth, the chronology is correct. And I've always thought that the chronology question was a somewhat difficult for the old earth perspective, and I'm sure you have an answer, and I'd like to hear it. But you have plants on day 3. We know that there are some plants that require symbiotic relationships. You need the bees to pollinate these kind of things, but you don't have the animals till day 5. And in the day age theory, we have lots and lots of years in between these days. So I'm just wondering, what about plants that require animals for pollinating and just different things on planet that are so interconnected that how do you get the millions of years between them?
No, that's an excellent question. And again, if you read it in the original language, it's basically saying, let there be deshe. That Hebrew word deshe is referring to vegetation, green photosynthetic life. It basically encompasses all photosynthetic life that ever existed on Earth. Then you look to the latter part of that phrase, it gives you 3 examples. It talks about seeds and fruit and trees. But you got to be careful because in the Hebrew, the word for tree is far more generic than we would think of with conifers and deciduous. It's basically saying anything that's got stiffness to it would fall under that word tree. Likewise, the word seed would refer to anything that has an embryo. Well, all life produces embryos. And the fruit is the food that sustains the embryo. So these are highly generic terms in the original Hebrew. And moreover, I look at it as an incomplete list. Let the land produce deshe. Here are 3 out of many examples. And so the question is, do we actually have scientific evidence that photosynthetic life, vegetation, was on the continental land masses before we see the first animals on the earth? And if you were to ask me that 20 years ago, I would have said we don't have any scientific evidence. But we do have evidence that animals leave behind bones, skeletons, and shells that are going to be preserved for a long period of time. Whereas plants and vegetation, especially the early vegetation of the earth, that stuff decays very easily. Now, what happened in 2009, a paper was published where they said we haven't found the fossils of Earth's first vegetation, but we found the isotope evidence. And then in 2011, they said we've actually found fossils. A bit of an exaggeration, they found fossil parts. The biggest part was 1 millimeter across, but it was enough to establish that all the continents had abundant vegetation long before animals appeared in the oceans. And so it verifies that, yes, Genesis got it right. It also establishes the more we learn about nature, the more evidence we get for the accuracy of what we see in the book of Genesis. I mean, the example I gave about the experiment with the oxygen content, again, is a demonstration that we see in Creation Day 4 is actually scientifically correct. Experiments prove that to be the case.
I wanted to follow up on you had mentioned that from the surface of the Earth, looking at the chronology of the days,
Right.
that there's a good flow. There's a really good flow there, right? And I wanted to Deborah Harasma, and I hope I didn't pronounce her name wrong.
Harzma is her name.
Harzma. Okay, fair enough. So you guys authored a book together with Ken Ham.
This book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
4
That
views
book.
on creation, evolution, and intelligent design.
Yes, yes. So she writes the following. So she says, quote, "It is simply not true that Genesis 1 yields a creation narrative in perfect accord both descriptively and chronologically with the established scientific record. Abundant fossils and genetic evidence shows that birds, day 5 in the Genesis 1 account, appeared hundreds of millions of years after land animals, day 6. Seed and fruit-bearing plants, day 3, appeared hundreds of millions of years after sea creatures, day 5. When an atheist points out these discrepancies of chronology, reasons to believe only asserts that it does not match. EC instead grants that chronological discrepancy and explains the ancient context of non-scientific intent of the text," unquote. How do you respond to her objection concerning the chronology of the creation days?
Well, she wasn't alone. Ken Ham raised the same objection in this book. But I had a chance to respond to both Ken Ham and Deborah Harzma. It's written in this book. You can read it for yourself. And basically, I said the problem for both Ken Ham and Deborah Harzma, they've not read this book, Navigating Genesis. If they had, they realize that, we had a reasoned response to that. And our point is, I've already dealt with the plants, so I'm not going to deal with that. But they make the point about the land mammals coming after the sea mammals and the birds. What they're overlooking is that Creation Day 5 talks about God creating sea mammals generically and birds generically, but it never addresses God creating the first land mammals. When you go to Creation Day 6, it doesn't use the word for mammals. What it does is it speaks about 3 subcategories of land mammals. The short-legged land mammals, which I believe is a reference to rodents, the 2 kinds of long-legged land mammals, those that are easy to tame, which I believe is a reference to the herbivores that we use for agricultural activity, and then talks about long-legged land animals that are difficult to tame, which I believe is a reference to the carnivores, the animals that we use to make household companions and pets. And I mentioned earlier that you got 3 texts of parallel Genesis 1. When you go to Job 38 and 39, you got a chapter and a half that talks about God creating advanced land mammals to enable the launch of human civilization. And so that's what Creation Day 6 is speaking about. God creating these 3 subcategories to enable humans, once he creates them, to quickly launch civilization. And this is where I think we need some humility. And this is something you see in the book of Job. We would get nowhere. We'd still be in the Stone Age. with a tiny population if it wasn't for God creating these critical advanced land mammals. And so just realizing Genesis 1 does not give us a complete account. It gives us the highlights of what God created. And the highlights are focused on what's most important for humans to launch the civilization they need so the good news of salvation can go to all the people groups of the world. So we shouldn't be surprised that it's silent on dinosaurs, that it's silent on the Neanderthals, that it's silent on the first mammals. And incidentally, both Ken Ham and Deborah Harzma had an opportunity to respond to my explanation. Both of them declined.
Oh, wow.
So that tells me they
You know,
accepted my explanation.
Dr. Ross, you actually did a talk with her, and it's on YouTube. I think you can.
Yeah.
Get
I've
it from
done
there.
several
Were you-
debates with Deborah
Yeah.
Harzma. And you know
Yeah.
what I like about Deborah? It's always a friendly debate.
It is.
We get along well. And I let her make her points. She lets me make my points. And
Yeah,
several of them have been video recorded.
Yeah,
diabolical
it was
young
great
earthers.
chemistry. I really enjoyed just watching that. That was just
Yeah.
fabulous. Where we at, guys? I fell off. I had a baby that decided to leap over my entertainment center and turn off
You're
my
good,
router.
We're getting ready to. I know Dane wants to say something real quick, but then we'll go into. I really want to get into Yom. So
Okay,
so
there's one
go ahead,
more.
Dane.
There's one more chronology question that I have, and this was a detail that really was one of the things that kind of tipped the scales for me towards young Earth. So I'd be really curious about your response, and it's in the cursing of the ground after Adam and Eve have fallen, and it's in Genesis 3:18 where God says, "Now the ground's going to bring up thorns and thistles," and so I'm curious if you, in your model, are there thorns before the fall of Adam, and if so, how do you interpret Genesis 3:18? Because the way I read it is that there are no thorns on planet Earth until after the creation week, and it's actually God's. It's a judgment of God upon sinful humanity. So I'd be curious about your take on thorns, thistles when they arrive on the earth.
Yeah, there's a detailed response in this book, A Matter of Days. And what you see in Genesis 3:17, cursed is the ground because of you. It's not cursed because God changed anything in the natural realm. It's not cursed because God changed the laws of physics. Multiple places in the Old Testament, it tells us the laws of physics are fixed. As God says in Jeremiah 33, you change your mind all the time, but I'm immutable. I do not change. As evidence, look at the laws that govern the heavens and the earth. As they've not changed, I've not changed. And so what we are seeing is that in the Garden of Eden, there's no thistles, there's no thorns. After all, it's a garden planted by God. And so, just think of some beautiful garden. I mean, I grew up in British Columbia where they got the Butchart Gardens. It's a very well tended garden. And so, in my theology, God prepared this garden, really made it very productive for Adam. Then he says, take care of it. Now, where you got the thorns and thistles is outside the garden. And so the moment Adam and Eve sin, they get ejected from the garden. And this is where you see the thorns and thistles. But that's not the real reason why the ground is cursed. The ground is cursed because now you've got sinners managing that soil. And God is basically saying, this is not going to produce for you like it did in the Garden of Eden, because now you're in a state of sin. You're going to abuse the soil. And so you see this in the book of Leviticus, that the ground is to be worked for 6 years and rested on a seventh year. The ground is to obey a Sabbath rest of 1 year. And today we know why. If you don't let the land go fallow for a whole year, the nematodes run out of control. And now the land isn't going to produce. But if you have the land celebrate a Sabbath for 1 year, you starve the nematodes. And so in the 8th year, you can have a productive harvest. But what happened was people didn't obey that command, and then the land just wasn't producing. That's just one out of many examples where because of human sin, the land doesn't produce. And by the way, You look at the agricultural lands here in the United States, a lot of them are a lot less productive because they've been abused by unwise human farmers. So it's still going on today.
Right, Dr. Ross, it seems so amazing that, with the day age view that, we at RTB hold to, there's also you see a lot of fine tuning too, and how they're sort of interconnected, which I like.
That
Well,
actually,
that's something that came up in my debate with Danny Faulkner. I've
Yeah.
debated him several times. He's the best qualified young universe astronomer, but he's admitted in all those debates, we young earthers can't use the fine tuning argument, whereas you old earthers have a wealth of evidence you can point to for the miraculous intervention of God. So he says, I love what you do with the faint sun paradox, but from a young earth perspective, we can't touch that.
I was talking to Dane right before this, and I'm just curious, just a brief answer would do me anyway. But why can't a young earther hold to a fine tuning argument?
They can hold the fine tuning arguments if they cite fine tuning that's happened in the human era, but they can't cite the stuff that predates the human era. And that's where you see 99% of the scientific fine tuning evidence. It's pre-human, not post-human. So yeah, it's an overstatement to say there's no fine tuning evidence.
Sure.
There's some, it's just that it's a tiny amount compared to what you get from an old earth perspective. And
Right
young
on.
earth creationists scientists admit that. That's not a debated issue.
I gotcha. David, you've been really... Oh, Dane, go ahead.
Well, I just
last
agree with
thing.
everything Hugh says, so it's okay.
He's just gonna...
He's like my mentor, so it's like I'm just thumbs up in him every way. But no, I mean, obviously we're gonna get into Yam. I think it's time.
Yeah.
We spent 35 minutes on the last one.
Let's let Dane get his point out real quick, and then
Yep,
we
go ahead,
move to
Dave.
Yam.
I had one real quick follow-up, and then I'll
go
be
ahead.
quiet for a little while. So I've heard you mention many times about how the laws of physics have remained the same, and in 99.99% of the time, I totally agree with you. But there do seem to be instances in the Bible where God does suspend the laws of physics. A classic example would be Joshua 10, where the sun stands still for a day. So would you say that that God has never since creation week suspended or tinkered with the laws of physics to do something that he wants to do? Or would you say that, when the sun stood still in Joshua 10, there was a suspension of the laws of physics in some miraculous way?
Well, I would agree that that does happen, but it always happens from a being operating outside of the physics and the dimensions of the universe. So when Jesus walked on water, this is a being that created the universe. He's not limited by the laws of physics. He's not limited by the cosmic space-time dimensions. When he rose from the dead, same thing. When he created the universe. It's just that entities within the universe, we are constrained by the constant laws of physics. We are constrained by the space-time dimensions. They are inviolable. That's actually what makes science possible. After all, the laws of physics were changing willy-nilly, and the dimensions were changing willy-nilly, there'd be no point to studying nature at all. And notice the Bible commands us, we are to study the book of nature because it reveals the handiwork of God. That by itself implies that it's going to be reliable and trustworthy, which requires constant laws of physics. But if you're talking the creator of the universe, he's in a different category.
Right.
Cool. I agree with all that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let us get into Yom. And the first question that I have for you, Dr. Ross, do you believe that Moses intended his original audience to interpret Yom in Genesis 1 and 2 to mean billions of years?
Well, I do believe he intended that this word day that he used in Genesis 1 and 2 with respect to the creation days was longer than a 24-hour period. One of the literal definitions for Yom is a finite long period of time. But the Bible never tells you how long that finite period of time is. Never in the Bible does it address that. So it could be 10,000 years, it could be 1,000,000 years, it could be 1,000,000,000 years, it could be a quintillion years. I mean, you're left to interpret it as you see fit. Where you do see some biblical implications is where you've got King David referring to the ancient hills, the crumbled hills, where he refers to the erosion of the Kishon River and how he refers to as an age-old river. So there he is citing the erosion patterns he sees in the Kishon River, the piles of scree at the bottom of the mountains in the wilderness of Judea as evidence that, hey, these things are really old. But notice, he doesn't give a number. However, those biblical statements tell us we're looking at something that's significantly older than tens of thousands of years. But he has not ever given you the term billions. So that's a misnomer that old earth creationists teach, that the Bible says is billions of years old.
Right.
Only that, hey, we're talking a significant period of time.
Okay.
Dr. Ross, I just want to follow up real quick because we were talking backstage about a question I had, and this would be a good segue into it. Is and this may even be where you and I differ. Do you think the original authors are aware of the science that's going on? For example, what is it? 6 times, that it mentions that God stretches out the heavens, and we're aware of the cosmic expansion rate. And it's accelerating in velocity. And so from the author's point of reference, would he have known something like that? Or would he have had a more simple view that, the sky is just looks stretched out and it's more phenomenological, but the text just so happens to have that the truth like fine-tuned into it? Or do you think, the author actually knew that?
That's a good point. And I just finished a draft of a book that responds to theistic evolutionists and evolutionary creationist theologians who are claiming that the ancients, the contemporaries of Moses, were completely ignorant about science, and therefore it's a mistake to read any science into the Old Testament because they didn't care about science. They knew nothing about science. They believed that the world was flat. They thought there was this solid dome over a flat earth with water above it, where the stars were on the inside of the dome, and there was little holes in that solid dome through which rain came through. And so I basically have written a book refuting that and documenting how even in the 21st century, we astronomers cite the ancient astronomical annals dating back 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago to develop superior models for the interiors of variable stars, because the ancients were very interested in these variable stars and took really accurate records. So it's well known, for example, that the Egyptians, dating back 4,000 years ago, were measuring the periods of certain variable stars, and they measured them to 5 places of the decimal. And what we see in the Bible is that Moses was educated in all the sciences of the Egyptians. So, being a prince of Egypt, he would have been educated in these manners. And I basically document that all the ancient peoples, from China, Korea, Japan, Babylonia, South America, the Middle East, none of them believed that the world was flat. None of them believed that there was this solid dome over a flat earth. Now, it was in their fantasy literature, but it was not in their scientific literature. And an analogy I give in the book is that, what if archaeologists 1,500 years from now were to stumble upon the ruins of Hollywood and they find these film canisters and they observe the content on them and say, wow, these 21st century humans were really very ignorant. They believed that dinosaurs cohabited with humans. They made pets of the dinosaurs. They believed that the people were building cars that were based on wood and stone. And they don't realize the Flintstones is part of our fantasy literature. It's not part of our scientific literature. And that's also true of the ancients.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the literature, especially like Babylonia, Egypt, like you have this where they have like a 3-tiered cosmos, like you were mentioning, and so the thought is kind of well, hey, the other ancient Near Eastern communities held to this, and if you read the Bible in this way, it seems like it would be compatible with that same line of thinking. That's usually the argument that they go with, and then some will say that yes, and kind of like Rob, and I'm sympathetic too, would say that maybe that is the case, but it just so happens to be fine tuned into the text of Scripture of day age view.
Well, what I've done is compared the creation stories of the Babylonians and the Egyptians with what you see in the Bible. You will see similarities, but there's way more differences than there are similarities. And what you also see outside of the Bible, the creation stories all have a political agenda. And so they describe the gods of fighting with one another and how the gods are being supported and fed by humans. And this is used as an analogy for why the servants, the slaves, the plebeians need to serve the nobles and the royalty. And so they're using this story as a way to promote a political agenda where there's none of that in the biblical accounts. It's completely free of any politics.
Dr. Ross, I want to go back to Genesis 1 and Yom real quick, because you had mentioned a moment ago that there's not a definite time given to us in Genesis 1 for Yom, the days, right? So my question is, how do you know then that each of those days are longer and shorter than the other? So for example, in the graph that David had sent me a while back, day 4 is much, much shorter than, say, day 1 or day 2, right? So if there's not a given time in Yom, how can we say at the same time that, well, day 4 is much shorter than day 1?
Well, as I mentioned, the Hebrew word Yom has 4 distinct literal definitions: part of the daylight hours, all of the daylight hours, a 24-hour period, or a long but finite period of time. And notice in that 4th definition, it doesn't specify the time duration. So it actually allows the different creation days to be different periods of time. Definitely longer than 24 hours, but they could be, and they have to be finite. There's no room for infinite time. They have to be finite time. And definitely the days have to be consecutive. And so you got day 1, it's completed, and then day 2 starts immediately after the end of day 1. So it's consecutive, long periods of time. But as you'll see in Hebrew scholars that have written papers on this in the theological literature, there's nothing in the biblical Hebrew that requires these days to be equivalent periods of time. But if you do compare it with the established scientific record, what you notice is that you go from day 1 to day 6, the days get shorter. So 6 is shorter than 5, 5 is shorter than 4, day 1 is the longest of all.
Dr. Ross, to follow up with what Tyler just said, because I think he does bring up a good point with that. And if I'm not mistaken, Ken Keithley, who's in the scholar community,
Right.
I think he may hold this, that the days are kind of like we would hold to, that they're these long ages of time, but that it's like in the way the text is given, it's used like analogously to like just a human work week, like 6 24-hour days. I think it's called the analogical day view.
It's called the analogical day view. But
Right,
all Hebrew scholars who hold the analogical days, they do believe that these days are long periods of time.
So would that be the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, Jack Collins, for example, is an analogical day theologian. He was at our headquarters 3 weeks ago when we did a workshop on dual revelation. And he says, I call myself an analogical day view because I want to leave open room for people who take a framework interpretation. And I said, well, I get that, because we've had lots of debates with framework theologians. And when I first began to debate them, they said, there's no chronology in Genesis 1. But they've now changed their tune. They're saying there is chronology. God creates the universe first. Then he creates primitive life. And last of all, he creates human beings. They just say, we don't know enough science to take it any more detail than that. You guys at Reasons to Believe, you got the science. we're okay with that. And so people like Jack Collins and Ken Keithley, they want to make room for a broader range of old earth creationists. And I'm sympathetic to that. I think there's, oh, look at that cutie.
She wanted to come on and say hi for just a second.
All right. Hi.
Hi. Well, we got one more, I think, here that I think Tyler had. Dave, do you want to follow up any?
So I'd be curious, and I actually don't know the answer to this. I read only in the English. I don't know how to read Hebrew. Hopefully down the line I might learn that. But are there any other instances in the Hebrew Bible where Yom is connected with evening and morning, and it means a long period of time, and it doesn't indicate one 24-hour day?
Yeah, I discussed that here in A Matter of Days, and basically say this is a frequent claim made by young earth creationists, and you actually need to look up all those other texts. There's 37 or 38 different passages where you got the word day associated with evening or with morning, but they're really radically different from what you see in Genesis chapter 1. Because in Genesis 1, it says evening was, morning was, day X. What you see in these other 37 or 38 texts is that you'll see the word day associated with the word evening, but not morning, or the word morning, but not evening. And often you got to look over 3 pages to see the connection. And so it's not even in the same sentence. The best example I was able to find is Psalm 51:17, where David says, I'll pray unto the Lord in the evening and the morning and noontime. But the word day, you got to go back to a previous psalm to find the word day. And so I'd be careful, because this is a lot like the apologetics of Hindus and Muslims, where they'll take the Quran and they say, this text tells us that men would walk on the moon. Well, if you actually look at the Quranic text, yes, it does mention moon, it does mention man, but there's 3 pages between the man and the moon. It's not in the same sentence, it's not even in the same paragraph. And so there is no example outside of Genesis 1 where you got evening and morning attached to the word day, especially with the phrase evening was, morning was. And you get a similar argument. Young earth creation will say when the days are numbered, they're always 24 hours outside of Genesis. Well, if you go to Hosea 6:2, there you got numbered days that are referring to the Jewish diaspora, which is approximately 2,000 years. And so I tell people, look, whenever you hear claims like this, the Bible says X, actually pick up your Bible and check out all the texts and really see what it's saying.
So would you not consider Deuteronomy 16:4 as one of those texts that indicate day, evening, and morning? It says here, there must not be a scrap of yeast within your land for 7 days, nor can any of the meat you sacrifice on the evening of the first day remain until the next morning.
Yeah, well, it's not the same as evening was, morning was. It uses the word evening, then it uses the word morning. And also be careful not to compare apples and oranges. Genesis 1 is the only text in the Bible where it's using numbered days and evenings and mornings to refer to creation history, terrestrial history. All these other examples that are cited by young earth creationists are referring to human history, completely different contexts. And so you really can't make a statistical argument, because Genesis 1 is the only text in the Bible where it's using words evening and morning and numbered days to refer to natural history. And
So
people have said, what about other Hebrew texts outside the Bible? Again, you can't find any. It's unique to Genesis 1.
So, Dr. Ross, I think you make a really good point that the context of Genesis 1 is utterly unique. There's only been one creation event, and it was a miracle. But it does seem to me that there's one place in Scripture that it's in the Ten Commandments in Exodus, where it seems to tell us that this creation week is the pattern for our work week. And so it actually is saying the context of this original work week is the framework for human work week. So would you say it would be fair to compare those texts as actually contextually connected? And of course, it's the same author, Moses.
Yeah, that's a favorite argument by younger scholars. And again, I deal with it in this book, A Matter of Days. And they're citing Exodus 20. So it's the first reference to the Ten Commandments. But if you look at the Torah, you'll see that there's a reference in 5 different texts in the Torah. So I tell people, don't just look at Exodus 20, look at all 5 texts. And what you'll see is only 2 of them draw the analogy between our work week and God's work week. The other 3 don't. And in none of the texts do you see the preposition in the original Hebrew. It's in the English translations. For example, where it says, for in 6 days, the word in is not in the original Hebrew. And it does make a difference how you interpret the text. And also you notice in the Torah, it's mentioning not just one sequence of Sabbath periods, it's mentioning 2. We already talked about it. The agricultural land, Exodus 25, the land is to be worked for 6 years and given a Sabbath rest of 1 year. And so I and many other Hebrew scholars argue Exodus 20 is not giving us an equation, it's giving us an analogy. Just as God worked for 6 days and rested a 7th day, we are to work 6 days and rest a 7th day. And what you see in Psalm 95 and Hebrews 4, we're still in God's 7th day. And God has no biological limitations. The agricultural land does. And so our rest of 24 hours is not going to work for the agricultural land. You need to give it a whole year. A 1 year rest for humans is not going to work. As a pastor, you might be given a sabbatical of a year. But in terms of your biology, you're really better off taking 1 day out of 6 24-hour periods than taking a whole year off from your pastoral work. I mean, I'm a pastor as well, and I've been offered a sabbatical, and I always turn it down, saying, no, I don't think that's biblically being referenced. We're not like the agricultural land. But my whole point is, unlike we humans, and unlike the agricultural land, God has no biological limitations. Therefore, his rest period could be as long as he chooses. And I think a good cross-reference is Romans 14, where Paul talks about the Sabbath. And he's basically saying, you are free to celebrate the Sabbath on any day of the week you want. The principle of the Sabbath were to work for 6 days to achieve our living, and we're to use that 7th day to focus on the most important issues of life. To me, that's what the Sabbath is all about. You go to church, you talk to your friends, but you take that time off from your work to focus on the most important issues of life. Likewise, we have God creating for 6 days. But what I love about what I see in Titus and 2 Timothy, before God created anything, he began his works of redemption. And therefore, all of creation is to be interpreted from a redemptive perspective. To me, that's how to be successful as a scientist. Study nature from a biblical redemptive perspective. You'll be more successful in making scientific discoveries. But it's a similar point. What God is doing on his 7th day is focusing on his work of redemption. He created for 6 days. On the 7th day, he's focused on bringing billions of human beings into a redemptive relationship with himself. And as it tells us in Romans and in Revelation, that 7th day will end, and God will create again the new creation. And redeemed humans are going to be magistrates and judges and teachers over what God creates in the new creation. And so to me, what I see in Romans 14, don't focus on whether it's Saturday or Sunday. The real principle of the Sabbath, work for 6 days, and then take a seventh day off. And I remember once I spoke at a Seventh-day Adventist university, and I said, all you theologians and preachers here, you're violating the Sabbath because you work all day Saturday and you don't take a day off. You need to take a Thursday or a Wednesday as your Sabbath because Saturday is not your rest day. You're working from sunset to sunrise.
Right.
Well, there's something really cool, Dr. Ross, that Tyler brought up to me, and I didn't have an answer for it. So I'll just let him ask that question. It's about something called the eighth day.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, you had, just to follow up, on that, you had mentioned that the seventh day is still going. So granted
Right.
that there is no mention of evening and morning to signify the end of the seventh creation day. But given the biblical authors and the early church fathers' view of the eighth day, Leviticus 9:1-7, Epistle of Barnabas, Justin Martyr, the list goes on. Isn't it safe to assume that the early church fathers believed that the seventh day had ended with the inauguration of the new covenant?
Well, I've read all the works of the early church fathers. Some of them held that view. Some of them held the view that the seventh day was 1,000 years long. Some of them held the view that it was longer than 1,000 years. So there's a variety of opinions. But when you read the early church fathers, what's different from people writing today is their lack of dogmatism, is that they were basically putting these ideas out as possible interpretations of the text. And particularly when you read the literature they've written on Genesis 1, we have over 2,000 pages of literature that survives on their commentaries of Genesis 1. Only 2 pages deal with the time scale issue. How long is the seventh day? How long are the 6 days? And all of that literature is vague. None of it is specific or dogmatic. The other 1,999 pages are all about who creates and how he creates. And I've cited that in my book saying the early church fathers understood what was essential doctrine. What's essential doctrine is who creates and how did he create. What's really not that important is when he creates or how long he takes to create. And notice it's not in any of the creeds of the church. This is not a salvation issue. And that's what disturbs me about this debate in America. People get hot under the collar, and I keep telling them, this is not a salvation issue. Relax. We can be friends.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
I wanted to follow up real quick with what Tyler said. I know in your book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. And in fact, you recently did a Facebook post that I shared about, when God creates in the new creation. So you would say that's day 8, I believe. And I don't know if you've read Richard Swinburne, but even he would say something like you do. It's that God will take valuable states of affairs and continuously maximize the value so that we keep learning, we keep growing infinitely. So would you say that that 8th day is that, God just maximizing the value and increasing it?
Well, just to be clear, the Bible never uses the phrase 8th day. That's something that was invented by theologians. And I don't think any theologian thinks that there's not going to be a 9th day or a 10th day. In fact, we don't know how many creation weeks God's got laid out on his future calendar. Maybe what we see in Revelation 21 is just the beginning of a long sequence of creations. We don't know. But what it does tell us is that he will create again. I mean, Jesus made reference to that when he taught to his disciples. I go away to create a place for you. And what we see in the book of Revelation is that God's going to use redeemed humans, not the angels, to be magistrates with him over everything that he creates in the new creation. And Paul explains that in Corinthians. Says, we humans get to experience the grace of God. The angels only get to observe the grace of God. And because we experience the grace of God, we are being trained for roles that the angels will not be equipped for. So that's his context for saying we will be judging the angels. We'll be teaching them. Yes, right now the angels are higher than we are, obviously way more powerful than we are, but because we experience the grace of God, we're being prepared for a role. And so
Yeah.
we will be the magistrates over the new creation. But God
I think
hasn't
Yeah,
told us
because
about what he's going to do.
right. Yeah, I think Hebrews says something about humans were made a little lower than the angels for a while,
For a
indicating
while.
that we are
Exactly.
going to be. Yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Right.
yeah, so Dr. Ross, what I was getting at is like in your book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. Would you say that we keep growing and we keep learning, we keep exploring? I like how you said that we'll have like more dimensions of space and everything in the new creation.
Yeah, I wrote that
Man.
blog because people were asking me questions. When we get to the new creation, are we going to be learning anything? Or
Right.
will we know everything that there is to know? And I said, well, only God is omnipotent. And
Yeah.
therefore, I believe when we get to the new creation, we're going to be learning a lot. In fact,
Yes.
I joked with my wife, hey, I've been married to you for 4 decades, and I don't know a whole lot about you even after 4 decades. It's going to take the rest of eternity. And that's just one person.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, I think education's fun. And I don't
Mm.
think God's going to take that away from us. We're going to continue to learn.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
What would an eternity be without an eternity of learning about what God has created and about Him? I think it would take an
Right.
eternity
Right.
to learn about God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I am curious about one more thing. I know we're at an hour and 5, but since we're talking about the new creation, I just have to ask this one last thing, and then David or Dane, I'll hand it over to you guys or Travis. Um, I, and David and I have talked about this concept of death, right? And plant death and animal death and all these different things. And we know that Revelation says that there will be no more death in the
Right.
new creation. And
Right.
yet at the same time, we know that we're going to drink wine with Jesus. He's going to feast with us. We're going to eat. So how, if there's plant death, if that's a biblical concept, then how do you reconcile the fact that we will be eating grapes and all these different things in the new heavens and the new earth, and yet at the same time there's no death?
Yeah, good point. Well, notice in Revelation 21, it also says there'll be no decay,
Mm,
which tells me no thermodynamics.
mhm,
And we go to John 16:33, Jesus says to his disciples, in this world you'll have tribulation, but take heart, I've overcome the world.
mhm,
Well, as a physicist, I like to paraphrase that statement. In this world you'll have thermodynamics, but take heart, I've overcome thermodynamics. And it's
mm,
because of thermodynamics, you got death and decay. In the
mhm,
new creation, there will be no thermodynamics. Matter of fact, I look at the description of the New Jerusalem and say there won't be any gravity.
mm,
And it says there'll be no darkness. That means there won't be electromagnetism. So I believe in the new creation, we got completely different laws of physics and completely different dimensions. It's not going to be the dimensions of length, width, height, and time. Those are going
mhm,
to be replaced. And wait, when it says wine, I don't think we should narrow it into thinking it's going to be fermented grapes. We're going to
mhm,
be drinking something. I mean, after all, we have incidences in the Old Testament where you got God and the angels appearing and having food with Abraham, for example. So
mhm,
apparently, though they're not constrained by our laws of physics, they have the capability of being
mm,
able to consume food. It becomes an option. You don't have to consume food, but if you want to, you'll be able to do it. But I
right.
don't think it's going to be the food that we're eating here on Earth. It's going to be subject to completely different laws of physics.
Yeah.
And people said, hey, Hugh, can you give me more details on this? Basically, I can't. I don't know what the laws of physics will be.
Right.
However, what I wrote in Why the Universe is the Way It Is, we
Mm,
do know why God chose thermodynamics and gravity and electromagnetism and the strong and weak nuclear forces.
mm,
Those are optimal laws of physics to quickly and efficiently eradicate evil from humanity while he enhances our free will capability to receive and express love. And the moment evil is eradicated, there's no
mm,
longer a need for those laws of physics. And that's what you see in Romans 8, that the
mm.
moment the full number of humans have been redeemed, those laws of physics are going to disappear.
I like that. That's kind of like what philosophers call the defeat condition. What God permits is, the bad states of affairs that obtain. He only permits that for a short amount of time, and the only ones that he will permit are ones that he's going to defeat. So.
Yeah, or to put it another way, I studied the world's religions before I became a Christian. And what I notice is unique to Christianity is that it posits a two creation model, not a one creation model. And so in the first creation, he's eradicating evil and suffering. But when evil and suffering have been eradicated, the universe will have fulfilled its purpose, and it replaces it with a brand new creation, one that's radically different from this universe.
And that's why we have no idea what it'll be like, because we haven't experienced it yet, right? Like
we haven't experienced it yet.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you. I mean, I see you with your child there. What we did when our boys were 3 and 4 years of age is we had this dinner game. It tells us in 1 Corinthians, heaven is greater than anything we can possibly think or imagine. Right. And so we would challenge our young sons. Why don't you take a turn at thinking and imagining how great and wonderful it will be? And whatever we came up with, we said, it's going to be better than that.
Amen.
Amen.
I love
Dane,
that.
is there anything?
Yeah. So this is in a similar vein to what Tyler was.
Well,
just
let me do this, Dr. Ross. You do have a couple more minutes to go over some things.
Yeah, well, I'll take a few.
I know
more
we're
minutes.
over an hour. All right.
Yeah,
Awesome.
okay.
So Tyler was asking about the eradication of death in the new creation. I'm curious about what you think about death before the fall of Adam. So on the other side of history. So Romans 5:12 talks about death entering by one man, Adam. And, I sort of interpret that to mean that there was no death before sin. I interpret plant decay not as death, because the Bible talks about it as sort of the flower withers and fades, but it doesn't talk about plants dying. But humans and animals, humans and animals have the breath of life. It talks about us actually dying. So I assume in the old earth model that you hold to, death is in the world, far before Adam's first sin. So what's your take on death and when death first arrives?
Well, the most explicit passages on that are Romans 5:12 through 19 and 1 Corinthians 15:20 to 22. But notice in those two texts, it limits the discussion of death to human beings. Romans 5:12, death through sin as a result of Adam's offense came upon all people. Well, the only species of life on planet Earth that can experience sin are humans. And notice the text says death to all people. It doesn't say death to all life. It doesn't say death to all animals. It says death to all people. And you get the same qualification in 1 Corinthians 15:20 to 22. And in both Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15, the qualification is given at least 2 distinct times. So Paul is going overboard saying, I'm talking about human death. I'm not talking about the death of plants and animals. And I've debated this extensively with young earth creationist theologians. They agree that the Bible is silent on the death of plants and animals. It's only explicit on the death of humans. And actually, you do have passages in the Bible that explicitly state that plants die. It uses the same words for the death of plants that it uses for the death of animals and the death of humans. So evidently, the Bible does consider plants and animals as being life forms. But I think that it's just simple enough. We need to understand it's talking about human death. The Bible is silent on when death began to happen to plants and animals. And also, I think young earth creationists are mistaken in blaming Adam for this paradigm shift. He's not the first sinner. Satan's the first sinner. If you're going to blame anybody, blame Satan. And the Bible is silent on when Satan sinned, except for the fact it's explicit. He definitely sinned before Adam did. He definitely sinned before Eve did. But exactly when, we don't know.
And he was on the earth as a sinner. when he goes into the garden.
Well, I mean, you do have Job 38:7, which tells us that the angels were witnesses to God laying down the foundations of the earth.
Right.
So evidently angels have been here a whole lot longer than us humans.
Interesting. David?
Fascinating. Well, you know what, Dr. Ross, the last question, and just a real quick breakdown before we head off, is this idea of a local flood, right? Just give us a quick
I
rundown
didn't know he was going to talk about this.
yeah. Well,
Okay.
I just wanted a quick one. Obviously, we're gonna go. This is gonna. I want this to be a springboard into our conversation as well as we.
Okay,
as we
fair
move
enough.
forward. I mean,
That'll work.
we've got the master of the old earth here, so I'm, I have to at least just give us a quick rundown of.
I'll be really
the
quick,
flood.
but let me make a suggestion. I mean, the global flood model actually predates young earth creationism. It was a springboard for young earth creationism. I think it'd be worth doing a whole show on the flood of Noah. It's that important of an issue, but I'll be real quick. 2 Peter 2:5, it says the world of ungodly people was flooded. And what you see in 2 Peter 3:5 and 6, the world that existed at that time was flooded. So in 2 Peter, they flood the word for world is always qualified by adjectives. The world of the ungodly people, the world that existed at that time. And what you see in Genesis 7 and 8 is that it uses multiple words for the animals that were wiped out by the flood. And in particular, you'll see the Hebrew word basar, which is a reference to the soulish animals that were associated with the ungodly people. And it's the book of Leviticus that tells us the only animals that can be damaged by human sin are the nephesh animals, the soulish animals that are in relationship with people. And therefore, the flood of Noah was designed to wipe out all ungodly people and all the soulish animals associated with them. And so in my model, I don't have the flood wiping out Antarctica because there was no ungodly people there. And the penguins had no contact with the ungodly people, so they wouldn't have been damaged by the behavior of those ungodly people. And so the answer to how extensive was the flood? It was extensive enough to wipe out the entire world of ungodly people and all the soulish animals associated with them. I also believe that the flood of Noah was an ice age event because of how long it took the flood waters to recede, which means that the flood probably covered at least 1 million square miles, maybe more.
Wow.
So it's not a small flood. It's a really
That's-
big flood. And you won't get that in an interglacial, but you can get a flood that big during a glacial period.
So, Dr. Ross, wouldn't it be about the size of a continent?
Well, I mean, it really depends on the extent of ungodly people and their soulish animals, which the Bible doesn't get explicit about, but the Bible is explicit that humanity did not become globally distributed until after the flood. You know, the pre-flood passages, you see no geographical place names outside the region of the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. But as soon as you get to Genesis 10, the geography is global. And you also got God making the command, multiply and fill the earth. The fact that he repeated that twice to Noah is an implication. The descendants of Adam failed to obey God's command. They did not multiply and fill the earth. And because they didn't, there was no need for God to wipe out Antarctica and wipe out Greenland. He only needed to send a flood. Now, I think it's important not to call this a local flood model. I prefer to call it a universal flood model. Universal, and that it wiped out the entire human species, except for those on board the ark. It wiped out all the soulish animals associated with humans, except for those on board the ark.
Gotcha. So,
Dr. Ross, so it would be so. I was going to real quick.
Go ahead,
It would be so massive. Could you have like birds? Because I'm thinking, can birds or things of that nature? Like it was so massive that it would have killed any type of life associated with the world of the ungodly, right?
Well, I think bacteria probably survived.
Well, as far as nephesh animals.
Yeast definitely did.
I mean, the text talks about the land mammals or land animals. So, again, look at the different Hebrew words used for animals, and you don't have to worry about the insects or the bacteria. And you
Right.
do have to worry about the birds. And people say, well, couldn't the birds just fly away?
Yeah.
Not if you got a torrential rainstorm for 40 days and 40 nights.
Hmm.
I grew up in coastal British Columbia. Whenever you got torrential rain that lasted for days on end, the birds all took cover. They can't fly in torrential rain. And when they take cover, they basically wait out the rainstorm. But you're not going to wait out 40 days and 40 nights. And so the birds would have all been wiped out.
Yeah, that's interesting how, because David and I, with Dane, was actually talking about the flood on our last episode, and David had brought up Dr. Heiser, Dr. Michael Heiser's interpretation of the word all there, and where it sounds like you guys might disagree a little bit. You would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you would say that it did wipe out all of the ungodly animals and humans, but
Right.
not all animals, period, without qualification.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. No, I think the kangaroos survived, the polar bears survived, the emperor penguins survived because they had no contact with humans.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's a
what
principle you see throughout the entire Bible. God always limits his judgment wrath to the extent of the reprobate behavior. So, for example, when Abraham had a debate with God, and when God says, I'm going to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah, notice you got Abraham saying, what about these wicked Amorites? And what was God's response? Their wickedness has not yet reached its fullness. I will not touch them at this time. Your descendants, 400 years from now, they will take care of them. But they're not reprobate like the people in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Gotcha. Dane,
Yeah,
is
so
there anything
yeah,
that you
that's
wanted
kind of
to?
like that. That's exactly what I was meaning by exhaustive totality, guys. So that's all I was trying to
Well,
refer
you
to.
didn't say it like that. No, I'm just
I
kidding.
did say
I love
exhaustive
you, brother.
totality, but yeah.
We'll go back and
So,
listen.
guys, I think it's been great. We've already kept Dr. Ross 20
Yeah.
minutes over.
I do, real quick, I do want to see if Dane has any last words.
Go ahead.
Because you've been pretty quiet, bro.
Well, actually, I think I'm gonna be comfortable leaving it where it is,
Fair enough.
because I think the flood, like Dr. Ross said, it probably requires its own full hour. And if I start throwing out questions, we'll be here
We'll be
another
here.
40 minutes.
Yeah. Dr. Ross, so
Yeah,
you're
let's not
good-
do
you're,
that.
You're good for another discussion on the flood with us then.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to follow this up with a flood, and you're a fun group
Let's
to talk
do
to. So,
Oh,
yeah.
all right. Well,
Happy to
thank you,
come back.
Dr.
I hope
Ross.
us
We
young
really
Earth
appreciate it.
creationists, put a good spot in your heart there. So that's good.
But yeah, he's dealt with them all. Trust me.
Well, Tyler and I both have a heart for what you said earlier, Dr. Ross, that this is a fun discussion. It's an important one, but it's not a salvation issue. And all of us are brothers, and we can enjoy sharing the bread and the wine together. And we all know that we're saved by the same Savior, no matter how old the earth and universe are.
Yeah. I just wish Tyler was as nice to me as he is to you, Dr. Ross, when we talked about this subject. He gets really upset with me.
I told everybody that I would be on my best behavior, and I think I did all right. So,
Oh,
you're a
yeah.
fun
man.
group. I love it.
Guys,
Yeah.
I mean, this has been great. I've loved the time we've had together. And Dr. Ross, yes, we will definitely get in contact with Stacy for a flood update. We'll do one with Robert and one with you in the future if you have any time in the near future. But yeah, maybe in August or September sometime, or
That
before
sounds
the
good.
summer ends.
Yeah.
Sounds good?
Yeah.
Awesome. And I do have to give a lot of props to your publicist. They do such a phenomenal job. So I just like to give them a little bit of praise because I mean they're so quick in their answers and they help out tremendously. They even will give you practice questions if you need it.
nice.
I mean they've
wow.
offered questions. I was like, oh no, we got our own questions, but they're like, oh okay.
Thank
But
you.
they do that and they're very helpful. So you have
That's
great publicists, Hugh. I love them. They're great. They're always so cordial and nice whenever I get in touch with them. So
Well, that's good to
yeah.
hear. Thank you.
Yep. Keep them on. Keep them on.
Yeah, we'll keep them.
RTB is the best.
Yes, RTB is the best. It is probably the best ministry I've worked with. So,
yeah. And for those who don't know, you
yep.
can find all of Dr. Ross's stuff. Reasons to Believe. Is it .org or .com?
Reasons.org.
Reasons.org.
Reasons.org. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, you can also find his books on Amazon. Everyone that he
Plug.
flashed. Yeah.
Yes.
Plug away, Dr. Ross.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I've read almost every one of Dr. Ross's books. And it's like all these. I really don't have any questions because I already know the response. I'm so familiar with his work.
Yeah, but you know, I think the biggest problem was that I've had like years of Dr. Ross, so like I read the books when they first come out, and then I don't pick them up when the new editions come out sometimes till later. So what I'm gonna have to do, I think, is like create like a series and just read them all back to back.
Is there any new books that you have in the works, or anything you can kind of give us a sneak preview at?
I didn't hear that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. What I asked was, is there any books that you have in the works now? Anything that you can give us a sneak preview to?
Well, this one got released just a few days ago, Designed to the Core.
Okay.
It's my latest book on the cosmic fine tuning. And for the next 6 weeks, anyone can get a copy just by sending a donation to Reasons to Believe.
Yeah, and I've done that.
Yep. And for my other book, if you go to reasons.org/Ross, you can download a free chapter.
Right on.
Awesome.
Right on.
Awesome.
That's
And if
great.
you join their email, their newsletter, you'll get a free ebook that came in that helps you on Genesis 1. I really appreciate that one, Dr. Ross. That was really good. But anyways, guys, again, Dr. Ross, it's been a pleasure. Always been a pleasure. And it always is with RTB. We had, I think the last person we had on was Dr. Samples, or Professor Samples. Yeah, he came on not too long ago with Travis and me, and we all talked about his book on Christianity Cross-Examined. That was really fun. So, but anyways, guys, I'm going to kick it back to Tyler to give his closing.
Nah, you close this. No, I will. I got it. So thank you again. It has been an honor and a privilege to sit down and talk with you, Dr. Ross. I've enjoyed this conversation. I'm definitely going to go back and listen, take my notes, and get ready for the second part. And so again, thank you. Reasons.org. Get Dr. Ross's books. Check out the website. Get your free chapter by downloading that. And we got a lot of stuff coming up on Faith Unaltered. So check this out, y'all. Friday night at 7 p.m., we will have Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy on the radio and YouTube. We're hoping that we can mix and mash our YouTube and our radio broadcast we can do this all in one, and it'll be great. But we got Michael Jones, we got Robert Rowe. Is that okay? On the 22nd at 7 p.m. And actually, 22nd, I'll be with David. Well, not that. We'll be leaving to go visit David on the 22nd after that interview. So if y'all could be praying for us, me and my wife and little baby girl that you saw a while ago, we're all going to go down and hang out with David for a week. So that'll be fun. Got some Faith Unaltered stuff to do and some stuff to record, and I think it's going to be a blast. But y'all, thank you so much. Dane Von Ace, Travis Worth, my co-host, my brother David Russell. This has been awesome, and I love you guys so much, and we will see you next time on Faith Unaltered. But until then, God bless, good night, and stay like Christ.
God bless.